This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra, and my guest today is Dr. Kelly Casperson, who truly is like a new species of human because you are a practicing urogynecological surgeon, right? Or
Yep, urologist.
A urologist. Okay.
I don't know how to deliver a baby.
Okay, I got it. Okay, right. So you come through urology and okay, good.
Yeah.
So you are a seriously practicing urologist. You are a sex coach. You are a podcaster. You have an amazing relationship. I anticipate discovering other things about you. But, well, first off, anything else you want the listeners to know before we go further in this conversation?
Nope.
Okay.
They'll find out more.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Perfect. So I want to know, how is it that you are so, I'll put it this way first, so extraordinarily left-brained and so extraordinarily right-brained, that you are so evidence-based, you are a practicing surgeon, and you and I both know that that is an all-consuming identity, and yet you have chosen, it's like all consuming in your schedule in terms of your professional life. And it is an all consuming identity, which really doesn't leave wiggle room for other identities for most surgeons.
Mm-hmm.
And yet,
yeah, it's enough. It's enough for most people.
It's like more than enough. It's like most of the ways of being that are like soft and casual and anecdotal. It's like, no, I don't do that. I'm a surgeon. There's like no existential room for additional identities.
Right. And it might threaten my identity.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So, and yet you're a coach, and I have to say, you're one of my favorite conversation partners these days, and you think in innovative ways. You are broadly read in the realm of sexuality and pleasure in a way that goes way beyond anything that you would ever find in your urologist training, which is largely with male anatomy. And yet here you are, like the sexual renaissance woman. It's not just that I'm impressed and admire how many areas of expertise you have. It's like, how do you feel like you're you? It's like, in the best way, you have multiple personalities, but it's all harmonious and unified.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, first of all, thank you. I'm going to keep hanging out with you because you're just so complimentary of me, and I need more of this in my life. So thank you. I think it's just being all of me, right? Instead of one piece of me. And learning and exploring everything you're curious about. And I think the whole, like, I got into med school because I like rules, I like logic, I like being the leader, I like being at the top of the class. So like kind of all that linear stuff. But I also like to know how can we break the rules, and why is it this way? And what if we think about it differently? So I kind of have this like anti-authority, like, I don't know, a small part of an anarchist, I guess. But it's like, now once you learn the paradigm and you understand the paradigm, then you can start to change the paradigm, right? And I like the whole belief of like, you're going to change something from within the system, because the people who try to change something from without the system, that's way harder, it seems. So it's like, I'm in the system of medicine. I get it. I get the way we think. I was in the OR yesterday I was a male surgeon and a male anesthesiologist, and they said, some fact-based thing that they thought. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's because you're existing in the male paradigm of, surgery. And I just say things very fluently now. And I kind of like, they stood back for a second because they're like, oh, well, yeah, because that's the right one. And it's like, no, it's just one, But it's like, these are the conversations I have now.
But like, from my point of view, that takes courage. That is a massive paradigm change, to be comfortable with who you are and say those kinds of things, because urology it is a man's world. It is a man's world in terms of the patients. And in most hospitals, it is a man's world in terms of the surgeons too.
100%. 9% of American urologists are female.
Okay, that's actually higher than I would have guessed.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there at 9%.
I do have to say, I have
guess who has
loved
50? Guess who has 50% of the bladders and 50% of the genitals? Women.
Right.
It needs to be
I
more of us.
know. I know. I remember when I was in medical school, I had an attending who is a female urologist, and that was so intriguing to me. I was like, you spend all that time with penises and you know them in this way and you don't have one. But of course, that's how the majority of OBs were until it started to shift that there are actually a majority of women OBs. But anyway, I just think it's really amazing. And that for any of us who do anything, I think the key to more vibrancy, more aliveness, more service is being me, as you say, like being who we truly are. So, is there a particular moment that resulted in your pivoting into being more you? Would you say you always have been, and the way you live now, it just makes sense? Like that's how you've been since you were 6 years old?
I think I've always felt that I was too much, and I always was trying to keep a lid on it, right? I was the loud one. I was the one who asked questions. I was the one who was like, always questioning stuff. And at some point I realized like there isn't really anybody smarter than me. Like I'm smart and other people are smart, but like there's not this big group that's smarter than me that I have to defer to anymore, right? And it's like, and once you live life enough and you do it enough, I think this definitely starts to happen in your 40s where you're like, yeah, I know some stuff now. Here I am. And turns out I can help other people know stuff. And so you learn your power in like, now that I know everything, what am I going to do with that? Right. And so that's kind of where I've really gone with this whole female sexual education thing of like, now I know more than I have. It's a calling, right? I can't not share this information.
Irresponsible.
I'm
to
responsible.
Keep it to yourself.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So let me back up to create a little context before my next question. Anyone who's listened to any other episode of the Marriage Podcast, either it's a solo episode that I'm doing or I have interviewed couples. And interestingly, 100% of them, it was the first time they'd ever been interviewed together. And there were a few who were just like, yeah, we'd love to. But almost all of them, I asked the woman, these are all heteronormative couples. And she said to me, I have to ask my husband. I'm not really sure what he's going to say. But in all cases, sometimes it took just one conversation. Sometimes they had to think about it overnight. Ray Stoney, I think it took about a week before he was comfortable to actually say yes. And they wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be asking intimate details about their sex life, which I only have by inference. And yet with you, when I asked about interviewing you and your husband, you were just very clear right off the bat. He's an introvert and that's not happening. And I have respect and admiration for you, and I didn't push it, although I did consider pushing it, but I just knew that that wasn't the way to go. So given that he's an introvert, and that's why we're doing this interview, just you and me, talk to me about being too much in the context of your marriage. Like when you're talking about just being too much, too smart, too capable, I think many of us women, we dial down for our partner's egos so that it's just not too much for them to have to deal with. So how has this played out in your marriage? And I know I've said a bunch of things, so please just respond to the one that's most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not having him on here because I love him so much, and I know him. I know him pretty well. You never can fully know somebody, which is where the fun is, right? But it's like I know him enough to be like, I know how he'd respond. I know how that conversation would go, and it's like I love him so much that I just get to even save him from having that conversation because this is my thing, and he wouldn't ask me to go play, whatever 8 hours of video games with him because that's like what he would do for fun. And so I respect his boundaries. I respect what is enjoyable for him. And so for me being like, no, it's a hard no, I'm not even going to ask him, is me loving him so hard and like knowing who he is as a human being. I think the other thing is he's wicked smart. So like I married very well on the intelligence level. So it kind of we have
That gives you permission to be as self-expressed in your smarts.
yes, I get to be a wicked smart surgeon because he's wicked smart at what he does. So it's not competing. It's just kind of equal, right? So and then I think every extrovert I'll extrovert, but then after I do a day of interviews, I'll like want to read a book on the couch and like sip tea and like be super quiet, So I have my introvert part that I get to be with him.
So what would he say if I asked him if he ever thinks you're too much?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'll have to ask him on our walk today. I don't think he would think I'm too much. Or if he did, he would say it was okay.
I actually think that women often think we're too much, but our men don't think that. I'll speak from my own experience that it is true that when my husband and I first got together, I was so vibrant and dynamic and expressive. Like if I love something, I'd be like, I just love this so much. And he was used to a much more tame, steady way of doing things. He studied neuroscience at Harvard because he wanted to understand all the intricacies of this and that. And I just think it was emotionally overwhelming for him. But after he learned to not compromise, not disconnect from his feelings and be more present, like anytime that I'm concerned I'm too much, he's like, no, bring it on, baby. Like he just is like, what I'm trying to say is as soon as he learned that he didn't have to be that expressed, he fell in love with how expressed I am. Mm-hmm. And we often miss that, I think, when negotiating this particular challenge.
Totally. And I think, my husband taught me very early on because he met me as an intern in surgery. Right. And so if you can like date and want to marry somebody who's an intern in surgery, like you're all in because you know how bad it is. Right.
Okay, so let's spell that out because there are a lot of listeners who are not physicians.
So it was before the 80-hour work week got instituted.
Right. Me too. I trained then too.
Yeah. So it's like every other night you're spending the night at the hospital. You're brain dead when you're done. You haven't showered. You're eating poorly. Like it's
it's like 36-hour shifts.
Yeah.
You have a 36-hour shift, you sleep, and then you do another 36-hour shift.
Yeah. So if you can think I'm like sexy and smart and even remotely interesting to hang out with at that level, like it's only going to get better.
Okay. So one of the statistics that I shared with you is, I'm not actually sure what the source of it is, but it appears in a lot of different places that the majority of couples spend less than 4 minutes a day discussing anything other than logistics and children.
Yeah, you blew my mind with that when you shared that with me.
Okay, I have to say, one of the moments that I just felt so much more affection and appreciation for who you are is when you said that statistic blew your mind, because that told me how you live. Like, tell us why that blows your mind.
Oh, I think it's like that statistic's probably in the same mind-blowing statistic of like the average person watches 6 hours of television a day. And I'm like, how is this even reality? Like, I don't even understand it. Which I guess shows like, how I live. But yeah, it's like I've got my like intellectual equal who's hot as hell, who likes me, who like cares how I do, who we're teammates in parenting. Like, oh my gosh, why wouldn't you want to hang out with this person? Why is life so busy that you would give it to everybody but that person?
Yeah, that reminds me of when I was rude to my mother in my teens, and she'd be like, why would you talk to your family this way and be so polite and put together for everyone else? And I don't know if I changed my behavior, but that question definitely stuck with me. Like, why do we do that? And I now have a lot of opinions about it, but I want to take a swerve because I've really been looking forward to asking you this question. So your podcast called You Are Not Broken, I love it so much. And I listened recently, and in there, you said something, you can correct me if the details aren't quite right, but that basically pubic hair has a function. And that as women, we need to have moist genitals, not just during sex, but like all the time, the same way we don't want to have a parched mouth. We want to be creating enough saliva and drinking water and doing things so that our mouth is moist. That there's, you didn't say this, I'm saying this, but that there's something comparable that happens with our vagina, that we need the moisture, and that when women remove their pubic hair, then there are more secretions that come from the vagina because pubic hair has the function of keeping things moist. Is there anything to adjust? Is that the general idea?
Yeah, and I agree with you. And then pubic hair will like kind of catch some of that stuff. So like women who remove their pubic hair, they're like, "What's all this stuff my vagina's doing?" And I'm like, "Well, you wouldn't have noticed that had you, not ripped out the curtains."
Okay, so I was so fascinated by this, and it gets to what I've already said about you, because like that's such a kind of a lay consideration, and then you're aware of this data and research about it. Like, where do you find these studies?
Just keep reading. I'm just curious. I just want to know stuff. Like, why is there an industry? Why is there like multi-million dollar industry of ripping pubic hair out in our society? Like, that's really weird to me.
Okay, so why is there?
I think because, well, style trends come and go. Like apparently skinny jeans are out again. Like, things come and go. This is personal opinion. My personal opinion is we're kind of, when you remove pubic hair, you're kind of taking away the sexuality of a woman because you're really putting the view of the labia in a pre-pubertal, which is concerning to me, or even a postmenopausal, lack of hormone state. So I really think we're presenting sexuality and attractiveness in almost this desexualized image. Wow.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, because in certain circles that I've been in, it's common to completely shave the pubic hair because that's sexier, maybe that makes oral sex more appealing, or I'm not sure exactly what the thinking is, but otherwise it's too messy. But then you end up with like a 12-year-old genital, or younger even, which, yeah, okay. Well, what's something else that you're researching that's like so basic that you would think doctors aren't paying attention, but here's a doctor who is? Do you have another thing
Yeah,
that you're investigating these days?
totally. Just to go back on the pubic hair briefly, clip it, shape, do whatever you want to it. But if you have skin problems or infections or pain or dryness, like consider what you're doing and if it's actually harming you. And the other thing, because I'm so frugal, right? I'm like, if you want your pubic hair to fall out, just wait till after menopause. It's gonna happen anyways. Like, why are you paying to do it early?
You're so funny.
There's my, I'm like, I have to talk about pubic hair a little bit more. So the other thing that's I think is mind blowing, which I didn't get taught, and now I'm like, I guess this is what I have to do to teach women of America. Labia minora go away. They dissolve. They disappear after menopause because of low estrogen. And I made it through medical school. I made it through urology residency. And then I'm in, my practice just thinking some women are born without labia minora because I do all these vulvar exams all day long. And I'm like, oh, she doesn't have labia minora. They're all born without labia minora. But all these women are like, 45 plus. And then I go to an ISHWISH conference, which is the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, which is a fantastic conference. And they're like, that's what happens when you lose estrogen. Labia minora are so hormone sensitive. They're created because of estrogen that the body literally resorbs them. And I'm like, I will be darned that I just thought people were born without them because nobody told me.
Okay, that is completely amazing, because also the whole idea of labia majora being the outer lips of the vulva and labia minora being the inner lips. The fact is that many women have labia minora, which are larger and hang through so that they are visible and not covered up by the labia majora. So I just think across the board, both the naming of labia minora and the life cycle of labia minora hasn't been well understood. That is so amazing to know. So when the labia minora shrink and kind of atrophy, it sounds like, How does that change sexual pleasure?
Well, labia minora is a sexual organ, right? Stroking it, tugging on it. The clitoris is the clitoral bulbs are underneath it. So even just kind of maneuvering labia minora can activate the clitoris. So it's a sexual organ. So you're going to lose that. Number two, it acts as curtains or windows or protection for the vagina, for the urethra. So you certainly see an incidence of recurrent UTI, recurrent yeast infection, more irritation of the vagina because you're losing your protection.
So that doesn't sound very good.
No, it doesn't sound good. And once women know that's what happens, they're like, what do I do about it? Right? What you do about it is you just keep estrogen down there. It's just vaginal estrogen cream. I think which should be preventative medicine. You should be welcome to age 50. Here's your mammogram. Here's your colonoscopy. Here's your vaginal estrogen.
Okay, so I have a question, and you are really the ideal person to ask about it because there's a part of me, even though, yes, I am a trained physician and I know all the data, there's still this part of me that is a result of having been raised by a mom in the 70s with hippie inclinations, and we were vegetarian and, back to the land kinds of things, that human beings are so incredible and intricate. And even though we have so much understanding, there's a great deal that we don't understand about human anatomy and physiology and function. But fundamentally, it's just hard to wrap around the fact that we were designed to be inadequate in some phase of life. And do you have
to, you don't have to label it that way though.
Okay, well, I'm trying to say it in the way that we don't there's no part of childhood. There might be particular individuals, let's say a child who has type 1 diabetes who needs insulin to be alive. That's a different situation. But I just mean to think that the whole population needs something external in order to be healthy at some phase of life. What do the evolutionary biologists have to say about that? I mean, neither you nor I are evolutionary biologists.
Yeah, first of all, I freaking love this conversation. I love having this conversation because I have this conversation all the time. But the evolutionary biologists would say, do you remember what the average life expectancy was for any human prior to 150 years ago?
Right. It was short.
48. In the 1800s in the United States of America, a woman lived for 48 years on average.
Okay, that was the average. And what was the spread?
I don't know. But the point is, we're doing menopause for the first time ever on a massive scale.
Is there something equivalent that happens for men?
They get low testosterone, and when but
they can survive perfectly fine. I mean, their prostates grow and they urinate less efficiently, but it doesn't diminish quality of life across the board.
They might argue with you. They might say it does. And here's the other thing: we don't tell men, "Oh, just live with it. Isn't that a beautiful side effect of aging?" No, we give them freaking testosterone. And same with Viagra. Oh, well, your erectile dysfunction, that's just a normal, beautiful side effect of aging. Why don't you just use your hands or your tongue more? No, we give them Viagra. So for me, I love the male-female paradigm because I can turn it around when you turn it on men. Because it's why are we telling women to just breathe naturally through childbirth and then we give them morphine when they break their femur?
Okay, well, I happen to have a difference of opinion about that.
Perfectly fine.
I mean, I think it's very important to have the anesthesia available during childbirth, and anyone who opts for that, I'm in full support. But I think the majority of women opt for it due to a lack of education. Because
Agreed.
There is something absolutely incredible and unparalleled in natural childbirth, but no one would know it unless they've had the education. It's similar to everything else. You
Totally.
do not grow up watching movies and conclude that childbirth can be this empowering, absolutely transformative experience. And that's relevant in everything that we're talking about, because anything to do with bodies, I think there is always the possibility that more pleasure is possible if you're willing to put attention on creating that.
Totally. One of the main reasons that women stop having sex, when you look at the literature of why do women stop having sex in their 50s and beyond, it's because of vaginal dryness and pain. And so vulvovaginal atrophy and genital urinary symptoms of menopause is a legitimate, real thing that happens. And I always compare it to, I think that one of the big problems is that vaginal estrogen is actually a prescription. So you actually have to go to a doctor to get it, which I disagree with. I think it should be over the counter. But we don't wait for you to get a sunburn to then say, hey, why don't you use some sunscreen? To me, the paradigm is we're waiting for women to have to complain about pain and infections before we give them the treatment that prevents all of that stuff. It's like, well, have you ever thought of, wearing a seatbelt? So just in case you get into a car accident, it's better. It's like,
okay,
it's
so if
preventative
someone
medicine.
is listening, at what age or what are the indicators that you would recommend going to get some estrogen cream?
Vulvovaginal symptoms of menopause really starts to rear its head 10 years after menopause, because that's kind of how long it takes to see the changes physiologically.
To run down the source.
And now, this is me just looking at vulvas all day long and listening to women's experiences of their vulvas, right? So my opinion is that it should be preventative. Now, it's not FDA approved for preventative healthcare of the vulva, right? Which probably won't happen before I die. But I'd say if you enjoy your sex life, if things are comfortable, if you have good lubrication, things are going well, why wait for it to get bad to try to reverse the damage? So that's where my preventative medicine comes from. I'd say 55, 60.
Okay, great. That's awesome. And I'm going to take a left-hand turn in this conversation that has been unlike any other on this podcast, that is for sure. But I assume that's true every time you're interviewed.
Let me know
anywhere.
if you need more left brain, because I just threw a little bit of right brain at you. Sorry.
No, that's not the issue. It was more that I really believe that in cultivating emotional intimacy, we pave the way for such extraordinary sensual and erotic intimacy. And so the thing that's different in this conversation is that we're not actually talking about improving communication. We're talking about straight up physiology. And you and I both know that that is not instead of the communication, and probably emotional intimacy takes care of, like in my experience, that takes care of it, like dissatisfying, infrequent sex about 80% of the time. And then another 20% am I actually focused with clients on what is happening or not happening in the bedroom. But in this conversation with your expertise, it's totally wonderful to be able to focus in on those like last 5-10% of what holds people back, because it's this beautiful opportunity to do so. So having said that, the question that I ask all of my guests is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being married to your spouse, based on my conviction that relationships are truly the ultimate context for personal individual growth?
I think the thing he's taught me is to love him for who he is, right? And then I get to extend that into everybody else too. And I get to extend that into myself. He taught me very early on that I don't get to change him.
How did he teach you that?
Because I was trying to change him. This is a long time ago. This is like surgery residency. So yeah, I tried to change him. I learned the lesson because I tried to change him, and he told me that I don't get to change him. Like, that's not my job. He is who he is. And like, it was such a like smack upside the head of like, oh, I don't get to make this person to be who I want him to be. I get to love him for who he is. And that's my only job, is to just love him for who he is. And I learned that early on in the relationship, and I learned it fast and hard. And I'm like, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to change their partner, and it doesn't work. It doesn't go well. And they get, there's a lot of problems with that. So I learned that early on, and then I get to extend that to myself, and I get to extend that to everybody else. So it was just this absolutely wonderful gift that he gave me.
Well, I think that particular learning early in your relationship is very significant context for your being shocked that couples spend less than 4 minutes a day talking about anything besides logistics and kids, because in learning to love him for who he is, then you interact with him for who he is, Like a lot of the numbness in relationships comes when we're frustrated that people aren't being who we want them to be,
Yeah.
instead of
For
accepting them for who they are.
Totally. And I think, especially women, we need to, and I love having this conversation, we need to hear this because one of my most popular podcast episodes is Your Partner is Not Broken. Because I think a lot of women are like, well, when he X, Y, and Z's, then I'll want to have more sex. Or when he X, Y, and Z's, then he'll be a good dad. Or when like they put so many contextual rules on their partner that they're continually disappointed. You can't change anybody else. Like you just stop fighting with reality, right? And you can have conversations about like, I think our household might run better if as a team we blah, blah, blah. But it's such an important lesson. And I'm curious about it too, because I'm curious, why do women try to change people so much? Is it because society's tried to change us so much? So we think that's how we need to try to change other people because we've had to be changed to conform to what society wants us to be? I don't know. That's my current theory.
That's so interesting. I have a different theory about it.
Cool.
Which is that we are rewarded in terms of cultural conditioning. We are rewarded for being nurturing. And nurturing, while it is intended to provide comfort, it's also to help people become who, like their better self. If we nurture children, it's so that they can grow up to be good people. Nurturing children includes helping them with manners and good study habits, and nurturing a garden. It's so that then there's a good harvest. Like even though we don't really think about nurturing as having an agenda, not too far below the surface, there is an agenda of how the person turns out as a result of our nurturing.
Love that theory.
And the flip side of it is that when we learn not to try to change our partners and to love them for who they are, there's this wellspring of vitality, sovereignty, empowerment available to us because we pull our energy back and focus it on the things where we actually can have an impact. It is a super empowering pivot to stop trying to change your partner and instead do your own work to really be comfortable in the presence of who they genuinely are.
100%. Yeah. And I think for some, it's a constant work, right? To be like, hold on, am I trying to just change them to make me happy or to validate my feelings, to make my worthiness? But I mean, to me, like my baptism was fast and hard early on. And every once in a while he'll remind me, but it's more like a joke now.
Totally. Yeah. That's really beautiful. Okay. So I think this has been a very accurate indicator of what it's like to have a conversation with you. We've talked about your marriage, about your time in the OR, about interesting studies about pubic hair and labia minora, about preventative treatment, about whatever you're thinking about. Like that just seems to me like the landscape of conversation with you. So if anybody wants more of it, what's the best way to find you?
Oh, my podcast is my favorite baby, outside of my children. So that's You Are Not Broken. You can get that anywhere on, iTunes, Spotify, all the places. I have a website, Kelly Casperson MD. I do it's more sex education based training, but I'm not doing it this year. I did one in January, but I'm stopping because I am writing a book. So I kind of had to be like, stop doing all the things that are fun and just lock it in. So
what is the topic of your book?
You Are Not Broken. Female sex education.
Amazing. And
it's going to be awesome.
Is it written for women of all ages? Okay, I can't wait.
Yep, it's going to be awesome. So probably holiday season 2021 is the goal for that to come out. Oh, and then I'm most active on Instagram where I tend to go live the most. So that's Kelly Casperson MD on Instagram.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll have all of that on the show notes. Well, Kelly, Dr. Casperson, thank you so. You know what I really want to say? It's not just thank you so much for coming on the Marriage Podcast, but thank you for being you, because it moves me so much. I think you are modeling something so important for a whole generation of women doctors and a whole generation of women patients. And you being you, it's really a glorious thing. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for being my friend.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.